Okay, so this week's selection is going to be the herbal actions. When it comes to botanical medicine, we can basically define herbs based on the herbal actions that they have. And so for a particular herb, there may be a list of actions. It could be one or two main ones and a number of minor ones. And these actions basically correspond to what therapeutic effects these herbs will have. So you could have, let's say, a herb that has an anti-inflammatory effect or a diuretic effect. And what you will often find is that for a particular herb, you will get more than one action associated with it. So there may be a number of major actions, and then there may be some minor actions associated with it. So, for example, a herb like golden seal, its primary indications is to be used to fight infections, but it has also been used historically to promote digestion. There may be other herbs that might be my first choice because of cost or availability, but you could use that, or it could be a side benefit that you could get from the herb. Now, when it comes to these medicinal actions associated with the plants, most of these are going to be associated with either one or two different classes of phytochemicals, and we'll talk about the phytochemicals in a different lecture, but the idea is that medicinal actions are associated with the chemical in it, and those phytochemicals are sort of like a drug. And when it comes to herbal medicine, you could have hundreds of different actions associated, or you could have hundreds of different phytochemicals in a plant, and that's why you have lots of different actions associated with it. Now, one of the things that you can use these actions for is if you have a particular condition, let's say arthritis, then you might want to choose a number of medicinal actions that would treat this. So it could be, for example, an analgesic, anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic. And if you could select the actions in your mind, you could use the required actions as a way to deduce what sort of herb you want to use. So starting with your condition, or if you have a number of symptoms that the patient presents with, you can sort of use those to go backwards and find out, okay, if they have these symptoms, then I want to have this action and that action for that symptom. And then in the end, you can develop a formula that addresses the main symptoms that the person's presenting with, let's say, 3 or 4 different actions. Now, when it comes to a herbal action, you could have something like an anti-inflammatory herb, or numerous anti-inflammatory herbs. And even though they share the same action, they could have different mechanism of actions for how they work as a anti-inflammatory. So you could have something like turmeric, where it might affect one enzyme or expression of another thing, or inhibit the release of this particular cytokine. And so it may work by one or more different actions, and a different plant affects a different type of enzyme. So just knowing that the herb is an anti-inflammatory doesn't necessarily give you a lot of deeper understanding of how it specifically works. Now, when it comes to herbal actions, I mentioned this last week, that herbal actions are often associated with the same types of actions that you'll see in pharmaceutical drugs. So in the case of, let's say, aspirin, it happens to be an anti-inflammatory. So is turmeric. But there are other medicinal actions associated with herbs that you won't see in the pharmaceutical realm. And these would be things like alteratives, which are blood cleansers, or adaptogens, herbs that help the body cope with stress. And so there's no equivalent of these in the pharmaceutical realm. So now, another thing that can be a little confusing is that actions can have different synonyms, meaning the same, having multiple words that mean the same thing. So you could have a herb that's used to treat stomach ulcers, and one book might say anti-ulcer, another one might say ulcer protective, and there isn't going to be a big difference between that. I'm just going to exit for 1 second so I can see my slides. And there are also some terms that are going to be somewhat redundant. So you might have a herb that's anti-arthritic, might also be labeled as anti-rheumatic. It essentially means the same thing. So there's maybe perhaps slight differences between it, but we'll discuss this in more detail. Now I'm going to go through and try my best to cover most of the medicinal actions that are out there that we use, but I'm sure I'm going to miss a few, and there may be some books that use slightly different spelling, or they may use a slightly different synonym than I'm using, but you should be able to figure that out. And finally, when it comes to medicinal actions, typically an action is associated with a system in the body. So you might have something like a diuretic, and you can probably figure out it's going to be associated with the urinary system. But then there are other actions, let's say alteratives, where these are things that cleanse the blood, and they may affect, for example, the liver. So they'll have an effect on the hepatic system. They may also affect the skin. So they may be included in the dermatologic system. They may also affect, let's say, the joints and bones, and they may be involved with arthritis. So they may be involved with the musculoskeletal system. So it's kind of difficult to divide actions into only one class, because they will be covered in other systems. So what I'm going to do is I'll discuss a particular system, let's say cardiovascular system, and a number of actions may show up there. And in passing, I'll also say, when we're talking about another system, that this particular herb may also, or this particular system, anti-inflammatories might be important in this system, or diuretics might also be important when it comes to another system. So we'll discuss that in more detail, but I'm going to try my best to divide the various actions into systems, but you will see overlap with the various systems, okay? It'll make more sense when we go through it. So just some general actions that affect almost every system in the body is where we'll start. When it comes to an antioxidant, I think everyone should have heard of antioxidants. Even the general public know what antioxidants are. And the way that antioxidants help the body is they bounce around and they scavenge up free radicals. And in the process, this decreases oxidative stress to the body. And so what free radicals are is they're highly reactive compounds that exist as a single electron, which is an unstable form. Electrons usually want to exist paired up with another one. And so when you have one electron that's unpaired, it's always looking for a partner. And what it will do is it will look around for one, and it'll find another electron that's maybe associated with a paired electron and try to break up that couple. So it's sort of like if some guy is single, he wants to have a partner, so he'll go around and he doesn't care if he goes and destroys some marriage or other relationship in order to get one. And so what ends up happening is when you have these free electrons moving around, these free radicals moving around, when they come into contact with DNA or proteins or fatty acids, it causes a reaction that kind of denatures or destroys that particular substance. So in the case of DNA, if you have enough free radicals disrupting the DNA molecules, it could cause mutations, or it could result in cancer growth and things like that. If it's interacting with nerves and mitochondria, then it could cause damage to the mitochondria, which would result in destruction of the cells or neuropathies or other problems like that. When it comes in contact with, let's say, the cholesterol in your arteries, then those free radicals can oxidize cholesterol and then increase the risk of atherosclerosis, or have those. Basically, that means that the cholesterol will deposit in the arteries and affect blood flow. So that's sort of a background on what antioxidants do. Now, when you think about it, you could have oxidative stress in any cell or any organ in the body. So this is why it's included under all systems. Now, a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables tend to have lots and lots of antioxidants in it. And the classic antioxidants that you can think of would be like vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, beta carotene. Those are the micronutrients that have antioxidant abilities. You will also see that there's a lot of phytochemicals, or what's often referred to as non-essential nutrients, that have an important role in the antioxidant defense system in the body. And so these would be things like bioflavonoids, anthocyanidins. What other things would be in that category? There's lots and lots. Any of the phenolic compounds would be in that category. So one of the things that we know that antioxidants do is they help to prevent us against degenerative diseases. Now, degenerative diseases basically means the wear and tear on the body. And as we age, we're exposed to oxidative stress. And the greatest source of oxidative stress in our body is probably going to be due to the oxygen that we breathe. And so oxygen is one of those substances that, although we need it to stay alive, in high amounts and long term, it does have a destructive effect on the body. So there's always a little bit of a balance there that you have to, we need the oxygen to breathe and it's involved in generating energy in our bodies, but in the process, the byproducts causes damage to our cells. And so when it comes to oxidative stress, we have a number of ways to protect yourself from it. And certainly the research shows without a doubt that diet and all the plants and vegetables in our diet, fruits and vegetables in our diet, contain lots of antioxidants, help to prevent diseases like cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's may play a role in that as well. And I can't think of too many disease processes that wouldn't be affected by various antioxidants. Now, when it comes to antioxidants, a lot of the time people would say, oh, this is good because it helps prevent cancer or helps to treat cancer because it's high in antioxidants. I would say one of the things with antioxidants is that if you look at these compounds, and they may be phenolic compounds or various carotenoids, is that these compounds, although they help scavenge free radicals, in addition to that, they play a role with interacting with various enzymes or receptors in the body. And so in addition to acting as antioxidants, they may have an effect on, let's say, certain enzymes that are involved with inflammation, or they may affect certain enzymes that are involved with the expression of certain types of DNA. And so I think the benefits of a lot of the of a diet high in fruits and vegetables is not just associated with the antioxidants, but it's also associated with the anti-inflammatory properties, and also some of the properties that I think we're only starting to understand the way that these phytochemicals might interact with our DNA or the expression of DNA and stuff. Now, the interesting thing is, I would say that all plants contain antioxidants to varying degrees, and so no matter what plant we're talking about, no matter what herb we're discussing, it will have antioxidants properties, because every plant will have bioflavonoids to some degree, and probably some carotenoids and things like that. Excuse me, just like any fruit and vegetable will have antioxidants in it. I would say that there are some herbs and some fruits and vegetables that have relatively high amounts of them. And I think, for example, if I want to get the health benefits associated with the anthocyanidins or various flavonoids in our diet, I really like berries, because berries tend to have high amounts of these phytochemicals and relatively low amounts of sugar. And I find that the sugar is, although a little bit's not going to hurt you, eating too much sugar is definitely not good. And to give you an example of this, just on Friday I had a patient who came in that I was working with, and when we did her reading, she was up about 10 pounds of about 4 kilos of fat, so about almost 10 pounds of fat since the last time I saw her, and it had only been a few weeks. And I thought maybe my machine was broken, so I double-checked the reading, and it wasn't. There was nothing wrong with it. And I said, have you been eating sweets? Have you been eating pasta? Have you been eating bread? She's like, no, I've been doing that. I said, fruit. Have you been eating fruit? She's like, yeah, I've been eating fruit. I'm like, how much fruit have you been eating? She said, well, I mean, eating 8 oranges a day. And I'm not kidding. And I'm like, clementines or big ones? She's like, no, the large ones. I said, okay, you have to stop doing that. So even though she didn't do anything else in her diet, she was eating 8 oranges a day, and that's way too much sugar. I mean, I think most people, I recommend getting a couple servings of fruit and getting a lot more vegetables in their diet, maybe some herbal teas and stuff to get their antioxidants. So the amount of fruit that she was eating, unfortunately, the sugar was causing more harm than the phytochemicals. So again, it's kind of like red wine. Maybe 1 or 2 glasses might be good for you, but 8 glasses is not going to be good for you. And I'd say with certain fruits, the same way. Generally speaking, I think berries have less sugar. Citrus is actually not that bad, but still, obviously, in excess, it's not great. And if you, for example, if you were to have a glass of orange juice, freshly squeezed, if you've ever made it yourself, you'll notice that when you squeeze it, it takes about 4 oranges to get a glass of orange juice. So that's an awful lot of sugar in there, and that sugar may not be desirable. And when you do the juicing, you also remove some of the fiber and the pith and some of the other substances that help to balance the blood sugar. And often the parts of the plant that people don't like are usually the things that are the healthiest for you. So the white pithy stuff on grapefruit that's a little bit bitter, and on citrus is maybe a bit bitter, is loaded with antioxidants in there. So again, not all fruits and vegetables are created equal. I think there are some that are better for you than other ones. Now, when it comes to antioxidants, to understand the chemistry of these things, I think everybody assumes that antioxidants are these wonderful things that are safe and they save lives and everything else. They're not. They're important. They're vital. It's really great to have these in our diet. But the reality is, as an antioxidant, it's an unstable compound, and so when you consume an antioxidant in your diet, generally speaking, it'll act as an antioxidant and scavenge free radicals that are floating around. The thing is there is a certain percentage of those antioxidants that will go around, and instead of grabbing a free radical in the body, so a single electron floating around, if they don't find one, they might bump into, let's say, a double bond on polyunsaturated fatty acid, which are relatively unstable bonds, or they might bump into some other molecules, usually double bonds are pretty good places for them to target, which it's easier to strip an electron from a double bond. And so what sometimes will happen is these antioxidants will actually act as pro-oxidants, because they will take a paired electron, which is stable, and rip it off and create an unpaired electron. And so they'll actually generate free radicals. And so there's always a balance that happens there. So antioxidants are safe for the most part, but there is concern that if you take mega high doses of an antioxidant, they could act as pro-oxidants and increase the risk of oxidative stress. And we know this. There's a number of studies that show this. I would say that the scientific community has concerns about taking a lot of antioxidants. And a couple examples of this would be, for example, beta carotene. We know that research shows that if you have smokers consume a diet that are rich in beta carotene, it decreases the risk of lung cancer. It's significant, but it's not that much. We're talking maybe a few percentage, 5%. I can't remember what the numbers were. Now, if you gave smokers a beta carotene supplement in relatively high amounts, instead of decreasing the risk of lung cancer, it actually increased the risk. And so, for some reason, beta carotene alone acts as a pro-oxidant. And so there could be concerns with, let's say, supplementing with high amounts of beta carotene in smokers. Another example is vitamin E. I think I mentioned it last time, where there's the HOPE trial, which they used about 10,000 people in the study, and they gave them vitamin E. And we know that vitamin E is a great antioxidant. I think that it helps prevent heart disease and has other benefits in the body. And what they found was giving vitamin E to these people for years in various dosage, whether it was 800, 400, I think it was more than that, maybe 1,000 IUs per day. What they found is that low dose, it wasn't really that effective when given vitamin E alone. And that higher dose, it was actually shown to be dangerous and actually made people die sooner. So when you increase mortality with a treatment, even if it's a natural treatment, I don't think that's a good thing. So I have reservations about supplementing with high doses of the single antioxidant. And I think this goes, another thing with antioxidants to be aware of is that many of them are phenolic compounds. And in general, when you have aromatic rings in chemistry, they have the ability to slip kind of in between the DNA base pairs and potentially disrupt DNA synthesis. So I don't think this is an issue when you look at your diet, but when you start looking at supplementing with these for the long term, it could pose a risk. One other example is also, for example, cysteine, NAC. Research that I've looked at shows that if you're deficient in glutathione, which is an important, what is it, oligoprotein, so it's like a 3 amino acid compound. It's involved with detoxification. It's important in the antioxidant system. And so research shows that if you're deficient and you have low amounts of NAC, supplementing it will decrease oxidative stress. But if you're not deficient in it and you supplement with it, in certain people it may increase oxidative stress in the body, and there's ways that they can measure this. So the point is that antioxidants, although I believe they're safe to take in your diet, it's good to eat a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables. We'll talk about some of the research on that in a second. When it comes to supplementing, I don't really have any concerns with supplementing with antioxidants short term, and even in high dosage, I don't think it's going to be an issue. But taking high amounts long term may not be safe, and we just don't know. And again, going back to when you're comparing eating 1 or 2 oranges a day versus taking 10,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, you know, you're, no pun intended, you're comparing apples and oranges, or oranges and almost like a drug here, because you can't, just because an orange that contains bioflavonoids, vitamin C, and other phytochemicals won't necessarily have the same therapeutic effect of supplementing with a single isolated phytochemical like vitamin C or one of the bioflavonoids, and taking that in super high dosage. Another thing that I'd like to emphasize, that from sort of what I've gathered looking at the research, is when you look at antioxidants, taking a single antioxidant in really high doses is not as beneficial as taking small amounts of many different antioxidants. And I think the way that antioxidants work in the body is the various phytochemicals and micronutrients that have antioxidant abilities work as a team. So we know that vitamin C and quercetin and vitamin E, they help to kind of shuffle electrons, these free radicals, around and stabilize them in the body. We know that diets that are rich in fruits and vegetables tend to have, I would say probably hundreds or thousands of different antioxidants in those foods, or maybe hundreds anyways, that work synergistically. And so I would rather, if I was taking a supplement, I'd almost rather take small amounts of many different antioxidants than high amounts of a single antioxidant. And it's sort of like when you look at, if you look at like a winning soccer team or a hockey team, and you think, okay, this team's, you know, when they won the Stanley Cup or whatever game they're playing, and so who's the most important player on the team? And maybe the goalie was particularly good that year. So the next year, what some other team says, okay, let's just get a whole bunch of really good goalies on our team, and that'll make us successful, you know. Or let's get a whole bunch of really good defensemen. And if you have a team full of defensemen, or a team full of goalies, or a team full of strikers, or a team full of cheerleaders, or whatever it is, it's just not going to work the same. It's kind of like, even if you look at like military sort of strategic sort of stuff, if you have like a medieval army and all you have is a whole bunch of archers, you know, they're not going to be very good defense against people with swords. Or if you only have cavalry, that's not as good as having a mixture. So you want to have a little bit of all the different types of units that have pros and cons to each one. And when it comes to antioxidants, Some of them might be water soluble, some of them might be more fat soluble, some of them might be able to cross the plasma membranes and have a better effect within the cells. And um, so the take home here is I don't think there's anything wrong with supplementing with antioxidants, but we really need to look at the research and determine whether it's safe or not and use it based on the research, because traditionally we haven't been taking antioxidants in really high mega doses for years. Short term, I'm not worried about. We're talking about doing it for 10 years. There may be an issue. And when it comes to the research, I would say uh, in clinic, you may see benefit of giving a particular antioxidant to a patient, and you may not see any harm. But when you conduct a study with 10,000 people over 10 years taking high dosage of a particular antioxidant, and one group who's taking it dies before the group taking placebo, then that raises some concerns, and we got to take this research seriously. So don't just assume because it's natural it's safe, and don't just assume because you've not seen a problem in your clinic it doesn't mean that you won't ever see a problem, and you may never even know if you see a problem in some cases. So there is a little bit of controversy surrounding the antioxidants. Now you guys can ask questions and I'll answer them when I get through this little section. So some of my favorite things are berries in general. I love. So blueberries, if you look at the nice dark rich color on the blueberry, they're rich in compounds called anthocyanins, and you also find these in other berries. You find them in pomegranate, you find it in wine. So anything that gives it that nice red and blue and purple colors are associated with these compounds. Green tea, I think everyone's heard how beneficial. It's got lots of bioflavonoids in there, contains catechins, contains a compound called ECGC, which is really good for you. So eat some blueberries for breakfast, have a cup of green tea. That's a great way to get those antioxidants. When you look at things like pumpkins, squash, carrots, they're rich in various carotenoids, and carotenoids have lots of health benefits. Tomatoes also contain different types of carotenoids. There's beta carotene, there's lutein. The one thing with carotenoids is they're different than other phytochemicals that have antioxidant potential, because they're not really, they're not phenolic based structures. So when you hear about things being, they're great antioxidants, they're high in polyphenols or high in phenolics, these plants that contain the carotenoids are not the same thing, and they behave differently. So beta carotene is very different than, let's say, quercetin. One's a carotenoid, the other one's a phenolic compound. We'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. Pomegranate juice and pomegranates in general, rich in various tannins, flavonoids, may help with blood pressure, may help with preventing different types of cancer. I love pomegranate. I find the juice is very sweet. So again, I don't know what the ideal dose is where you're minimizing the sugar and maximizing the health benefits from it. So I like drinking a little bit, but I almost always dilute it. As an aside, when it comes to patients, if they have a bit of a pop addiction, what I usually recommend they do is they buy some pomegranate juice and mix it with, maybe put about 20% in their glass, and then add about 80% soda water. So they get the sweetness and the bubbles like pop has, but instead of getting increasing risk for diabetes and heart disease and everything else, the pomegranate juice has some protective effects, which is good. Just going to take a sip of coffee, 1 second. So I thought I'd include a couple studies that helped illustrate the health benefits of various antioxidants in our diet. So when you look at bioflavonoids, here's a study, and there's going to be a few of them I'm going to quote, is this study, they basically looked at a bunch of people and looked at, based on their some kind of questionnaire, they evaluated whether or not they're having a diet that was high in bioflavonoids or not. And they used a couple of different ways they could measure flavonoids in the diet. And so they had 1,000 people, women over the age of 75, and they looked at the risk of these people dying in the next 5 years. So most people if they're relatively healthy, will make it to, I think the life expectancy in Canada is around 82 or 81, around there. So basically 80, give or take a couple years, is pretty standard. We're kind of programmed to die off at that point in time, and things just sort of start to wear down exponentially around that time. And so in this group of people, you had a 12% risk of dying in the next 5 years. And what they did is they compared people who were consuming a diet that was high in bioflavonoids versus a group that was consuming a diet that was low in it. And so a diet high in it would be rich in fruits and vegetables. Maybe they're eating chocolate. Maybe they're drinking tea. Maybe they're drinking coffee. Low diet would be someone eating meat and potatoes and only broccoli once in a while. And if you look at when you look at the all-cause mortality at the bottom here, you can look at there's improvement for heart disease and cancer, but the 5-year risk was about 12%. So what this meant was when you were consuming a diet that was high in flavonoids, what they found for all cause of mortality, so whether it's cardiovascular or cancer and everything else, that there's a relative risk reduction of about 63%. And so you guys may go through this a little bit more in the research class. So you've got basically a 60% reduction in death if you eat a diet high in various flavonoids. And so the absolute risk reduction means 4%. So instead of having, let's say, 24% of people dying, you reduced it down to about 4% or whatever the numbers were. And so translating that one more time is NNT means number needed to treat. So in this case, for every 23 individuals who ate a diet high in fruits and vegetables, one person in that group would not die. So doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually is an awful lot. Most drugs don't work this well. Like if you look at statin drugs for lowering the risk of heart disease, they work about the same, but they also have a lot of side effects associated with it. And don't forget, you got to die of something sooner or later. And you're not going to make it to like 450 unless you're like an elf or something. But so the number needed to treat, if you're able to reduce the death a little bit in this group, that's quite significant. So these numbers, when we're looking at diet high in fruits and vegetables, it's really clinically significant. It's not just a slight improvement. It's substantial. Now, if you look at it, only one, just when you look at green tea, for example, here's a study, and we know that green tea is really good for you. It is really good for you, but it's not like a magical thing. So here's a study where they looked at men who drank more than 5 cups of green tea a day, which is quite a bit of green tea. And looking at the numbers here, we're talking the relative risk reduction drinking a whole bunch of green tea per day is about 15% reduction. The absolute risk reduction is only about 1.69. So drinking the green tea alone, you have to have about 59 people in this group drinking that much tea and to save one life. So it's not that much when you're only drinking just the green tea. So yes, drink your green tea, but again, it's only one member of the team. And so although there is a significant improvement, you always want to stack your odds by have some green tea, eat some oranges, drink a little bit of coffee, eat your broccoli. You know, there's more to it than just one superfood. You got to eat, like most fruits and vegetables are superfoods. So eat a nice variety of those things. You can look at the research in more detail here, but I'm going to skim over it. This was another study that discussed the benefits of even relatively small amounts of flavonoid-rich foods are beneficial. So in this case, yeah, eating a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables, that's great. But often I find with a lot of things, it's kind of like going to the gym. If you go to the gym for, let's say, an hour and a half every single day, that's great, fantastic. But there is diminishing returns. And so if you don't have time to go to the gym for an hour and a half, you're better off going to the gym for only 10 minutes than going to the gym for an hour and a half. So it's not an all or nothing thing. So even modifying someone's diet just a little tiny bit, even if all you're doing is telling them to eat blueberries every morning for breakfast or strawberries, or increasing their diet by 1 or 2 pieces of fruit, that could make a huge difference on how long they live and preventing various diseases. So you can always get someone to modify one thing in their diet. And so, again, if someone's really stubborn, just say, are you willing to eat an apple a day? And an apple is a fantastic source of various flavonoids and antioxidants and other compounds. And just bring an apple with your lunch every day. Again, you've probably made a huge change in that person's life. They'll never know it, I don't think, but you may have extended their life by a year or two. Just more studies. There's tons of studies looking at flavonoid intake. Another thing about cancer and tea consumption. So we'll move on to the next group of phytochemicals or medicinal actions. These are the anti-inflammatories, herbs. And I would say that pretty much a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables has anti-inflammatory effects. Now, there are some herbs that are kind of those archetypal herbs used to treat inflammation in the body. And normally when we think of inflammatory conditions, we're thinking of, let's say, arthritis, because that's what most people take anti-inflammatory drugs for. Now, just as an aside, one of the issues with anti-inflammatory drugs is they tend to have a lot of side effects associated with it. And those side effects are mostly related to the stomach. And so when you take some kind of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, let's say naproxen or ibuprofen or aspirin, any of those, what they do is, the way these anti-inflammatory drugs work is they inhibit an enzyme called cyclooxygenase, or COX, C-O-X, in the body. And what happens is, when you take these drugs, there's an enzyme that exists in two forms. It exists as cyclooxygenase 2, which is involved with inflammation, and there's another enzyme called cyclooxygenase 1, which is involved with creating mucus to protect your intestinal tract against damaging effects of stomach acid or whatever it may be. And so when you take an anti-inflammatory drug, normally what ends up happening is you decrease the pain and the inflammation in the body, but it's not selective. It doesn't target just the COX-2 enzyme, which is involved with inflammation. These drugs also target the COX-1 enzyme that's involved with maintaining integrity of the mucous membranes in the body and generating mucus and protecting you against ulcers. So when you take these drugs, the main side effect is bleeding ulcers. And it can be very severe, where if you don't catch it and someone's taking a lot of these things, not only do they could be losing blood and becoming anemic, but it could also cause a perforated ulcer that could lead to death. So now you have to take relatively high amounts, but this does occur. So that's how most anti-inflammatory drugs. There are other mechanisms that you can decrease inflammation in the body. What I like about the herbs is that many of these herbs can decrease inflammation, but they target not only COX-2 enzyme in the body, but there are other places that they can target in the body, and I'll show you this in a second. And so the benefit of a lot of these is that many of them decrease the risk of or decrease inflammation, and you can use it for conditions like cardiovascular disease. So if someone has heart disease, there's always some sort of inflammatory process that's contributing to it. We know that if someone has elevated markers of inflammation in their blood, it does increase the risk of heart disease. And so people with autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, or someone who just has lots of inflammation in their body, they're at a greater risk of developing heart disease. Alzheimer's disease, I don't think that inflammation and oxidative stress is the only component involved with it, but it certainly plays a significant role. Most of these diseases are multifactorial, so inflammation accelerates the progression, I think, for a lot of these ones. When it comes to cancer, although inflammation doesn't cure cancer, like taking some anti-inflammatory drug, but what we find is that when people have more inflammation in the body, it tends to accelerate the growth of cancer, because inflammatory cytokines stimulate cancer growth. And so many herbs that have beneficial effects as anti-inflammatories often have potent anti-cancer effects as well. Now, in general, just so you guys can remember it, you'll probably figure this out on your own, but most conditions that end in itis, so itis, that itis means inflammation. So arthritis, gastritis, colitis, hepatitis, uh, all these things have inflammation as a component to it. And so a lot of these, it would be indicated to use an anti-inflammatory substance to help treat it. There are some cases, for example, gastritis. You will want to be careful which anti-inflammatory you use, because you could make gastritis worse if you use the wrong type of anti-inflammatory herb. So, for example, willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, which is a cousin of aspirin. Taking that, even as a herbal form, will increase the risk of getting stomach ulcers because it does target the COX-2 enzyme and the COX-1 enzyme, while other things like ginger can decrease inflammation in the body and does have a anti-ulcer or ulcer protective effect. So you want to be a little bit careful depending on which one you pick. So turmeric is a fantastic anti-inflammatory. You might have heard last week, one of the newspapers, I think it was Globe and Mail, had an article about turmeric and how it's overrated and that the compound in it, curcumin, it's not that good an antioxidant because it's not that well absorbed and everything else. That is true. The neat thing about turmeric is that the whole herb has other phytochemicals in it, in addition to the curcumin, that may play an important role in decreasing inflammation. And so, in addition to the polyphenols like curcumin that are in turmeric, you also find that there's research showing the carbohydrate component has some anti-inflammatory effects. And so, when you give a turmeric product that contains no curcumin, and the curcuminoids have been removed, and it only contains the sugars, many of these sugars, depending on how they're arranged, can have an anti-inflammatory and immunomodulating effect. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So ginger has a number of things that help to decrease inflammation. It's a great antioxidant. It's a great anti-inflammatory. It can be used for arthritis. It can be used for to promote digestion. It's very palatable. So if someone had arthritis and they didn't have a lot of money, you could get them to drink ginger tea every single day, and it can decrease the risk of heart disease and cancer, lowers cholesterol. So ginger is just an amazing plant. Turmeric's even better in my opinion, but it's hard to drink turmeric tea. Ginger tea, it's easy to make. Buy organic ginger, grate it up, add it to hot water, add a pinch of cinnamon if you like the taste of it, and it's very pleasant. Willow bark, yes, it's an anti-inflammatory. I don't tend to use it as much because there are some side effects associated with it, and I wouldn't use it with children because of the fact it contains salicylic acid, which can be contraindicated in children if they have viral infections. Another great anti-inflammatory herb is Indian frankincense, boswellia, and then devil's claw comes, and Indian frankincense comes from South Asia, and then devil's claw comes from South Africa. And so what's neat about this is we've got herbs that we use in herbal medicine that come from all around the world, from every single continent. So Indian frankincense is on the left. It's a resin that comes from a tree. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we're discussing the phytochemicals. Turmeric on the right, it's a rhizome, and so it grows in South Asia, but it's now cultivated around the world. So I think I took this photograph when I was in Costa Rica at a organic turmeric farm down there, and it looks a lot like ginger because it's a cousin of ginger. And if you break off one of those little fingers there, a new plant will grow up from that. You won't be able to grow it easily in Ontario because the winters will destroy them, but you could potentially grow it indoors. Now, I hinted at the various inflammatory pathways in the body. I'm going to just show you a quick little diagram. What happens is you've got cell membranes, which you can see on the left-hand side there. They contain various phospholipids, and these phospholipids have fatty acids attached to them. And what happens is an enzyme called phospholipase cleaves off one of these fatty acids. And so what are fatty acids in the diet? They're going to be things like the various omega-3s and omega-6s that we have in our diet. And compounds like the omega-6s, arachidonic acid, is found a lot in animal-based fats. The omega-3s and the omega-6s that we have in our diet that comes from plants, generally speaking, the omega-6s can be converted to arachidonic acid and go through this pathway as well, while the omega-3s tend to compete with arachidonic acid and have an anti-inflammatory effect. So when you eat things that are rich in, let's say, fish oils, EPA and DHA, or if you take, you're eating flax and chia that are rich in ALA, alpha-linoleic acid, it tends to have an anti-inflammatory effect because it's competing with arachidonic acid at these various enzymes here. So again, cell membrane, phospholipase cleaves off one of the phospholipids, you get arachidonic acid, and then the arachidonic acid is used as a substrate to go through the cyclooxygenase enzymes, and in this case on the left-hand side, that would be COX-2, and it produces a number of different prostaglandins. There's all sorts of different ones in the body, so they're like PGF2, PGE2, PG, I don't even remember all of them, and so some of these are involved with immune function, some are involved with inflammation. And there's another enzyme called lipoxygenase, which makes leukotrienes. And so prostaglandins and leukotrienes play an important role in inflammation in the body. And leukotrienes tend to have a particular involvement with inflammation in, let's say, the lungs. So they play a role in asthma, or in inflammatory bowel disease as well. So that's the path. That's the biochemical pathway of how these various prostaglandins and leukotrienes are made. Now, what's kind of neat is I'm only showing you this. You do not need to memorize this for the exam, but I want to show you different places in the body that you can target to decrease inflammation. And I'm putting a list of phytochemicals that have been shown in vivo or in vitro trials. Sorry, in vitro trials probably. Where they target these various enzymes. And so the COX enzyme, we know that the cyclooxygenase enzyme is inhibited by phytochemicals that come from salicylic acid, is found in lots of different things, including willow, hypericums, and St. John's wort. Chamazulene is found in chamomile. Harpagoside is from devil's claw. Curcumin is in turmeric. So lots of different, and that's a small list. I can go on and I could find a lot more of them, but that's a good start. When it comes to lipoxygenase, we know that St. John's wort contains that hypericum. It can work. Devil's claw will target this again. Boswellic acid, which is in frankincense, Indian frankincense, it will inhibit this enzyme. And so if you inhibit those pathways, you'll decrease inflammation. We also know that, for example, there's an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase. And although nitric oxide, which I just see a typo there, nitric oxide plays a role in inflammation. By inhibiting this pathway, it's just another way we can decrease that. Now, just as an aside, nitric oxide also is involved, has a positive effect on vasodilation in the body as well. So although it's a free radical and it has some negative things in one part of the body, it actually has positive things for heart disease in another part. That's just an aside. Finally, complement, tumor necrosis factor, interleukin production. These can also be inhibited by things like rosmarinic acid. Also compounds in ginger like gingerol, bromelain, which is an enzyme found in pineapple, and then finally curcumin again targets this sort of process here. So what's neat is if you look at a herb like turmeric in general doesn't really form a lot of ulcers in the body, and perhaps one of the ways that it does that is that it has an anti-inflammatory effect by targeting lots of different mechanisms in the body, and so it may not necessarily have a potent effect on just the COX-1 enzyme. It has a potent effect on lots of different enzymes in the body. So the only point of this slide is just for you to appreciate the fact that although a herb could be an anti-inflammatory herb, different herbs have different mechanisms of action. We don't fully know how they all work yet, but they do work. I can say that from clinical experience, when you take an ibuprofen, you usually get immediate, within half hour or so, immediate reduction in pain. Some of the herbs will have an immediate effect to some degree. I mean, it could just be placebo effect, but I would say often it doesn't have the same immediate effects that you get from non-steroidal drugs. But over the course of maybe a few days, because it's targeting different enzymes, it may even be affecting the expression of some of these enzymes. There is a reduction in pain and inflammation. So I usually give it to people and say, you probably will see a little bit of immediate relief, but give it about a week to fully kick in to find out whether it's going to work or not. Now, just as an aside, I'm also going to work on decreasing inflammation from their diet. So I'm going to encourage them to eat more fruits and vegetables. Also, I'm going to encourage patients to decrease their consumption of omega-6 fatty acids. So things like corn oil, sunflower seed oil, soybean oils. I get them to switch and use more olive oil, coconut oil. I recommend they eat flaxseed and chia seeds for breakfast, part of their breakfast. I might get them to take a fish oil supplement. So when it comes to treating someone with increased inflammation in the body, whether it's an autoimmune disease or arthritis, whatever it is, I may give them a few different herbs, change their diet, and that's how you get the best results. So it's not just one magic pill. It's many smaller magical things that aren't quite as potent. So let's take some questions now, or let's have a look at the questions. I'll pause it after each system here. Let's see here. Questions. Here's a question. Are the antioxidants in herbal teas comparable to servings of fruit? Hi, Anna. I would say that when you're consuming herbal teas, that would be a great way to get lots of these different phytochemicals and also some micronutrients, various vitamins and minerals, without getting high amounts of the sugar. So when you're consuming, let's say, drinking a cup of peppermint and chamomile tea, I think that's an amazing thing to do on a regular basis, because it's like you're consuming a serving of fruit and vegetables without the carbohydrate component. So you might not be getting a lot of macronutrients. You don't get the fats, the proteins, the carbohydrates, but you also, that's a good thing because you're not getting the sugar. So drink as much herbal tea as you want. I think that's a fantastic idea to do. If you hate eating fruit or you don't like eating vegetables, then drink them in tea forms. And have a variety. I think is always a good thing. Lots and lots of different types of phytochemicals. Have a little peppermint and chamomile, maybe have a little ginger and cinnamon. Go from there. Here's a question that Owen asks. Are we expected to know the details and result of each study listed in the slides? No, you're not expected to know any of the slides that I put up there that have research on it. I'm not asking you to know the details on it. I think the take home, what I want you to know is eating a diet high in fruits and vegetables lowers the risk of heart disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. That's, you should know. The number is what percentage, you don't need to know that. Okay? Michael's asking me a question. Are the fish oils high in omega-6? In a similar way as sunflower oil or some of the things you would cut out of a patient's diet to decrease inflammation. If you're taking like a fish oil supplement, generally speaking, most of them are concentrated and they have EPA and DHA are the two omega-3 fatty acids in the fish oils. Now, so I would say that fish oil supplements should not have any significant amounts of the omega-6s in there. Now, when it comes to omega-3s and omega-6s, I want to emphasize that omega-6s are essential. You require them because we use them to generate inflammation in the body, and we need inflammation. Inflammation is a good thing in your body. Again, it's one of those things that no inflammation is bad, too much is bad, so you just need a small amount. The problem is that with our diet, when it's rich with the omega-6s, then you increase overall inflammation. The research shows that a diet, when the ratio of omega-6s is much higher than the ratio of omega-3s, then you get yourself into trouble. I don't think there's a consensus on what the ideal ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s are. Generally speaking, I don't recommend anyone supplement with omega-6s because even when you take, let's say, chia or flax seeds, these are probably the highest or one of the highest plant sources of omega-3s. Even in this case, the number of omega-3s is about 3-to-1 ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. So you still are getting your omega-6s in this. It just keeps the relative amounts lower. When you look at something like corn oil, the number of omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, there is no omega-3s. So if you're eating like fried chicken, French fries that have been cooked in corn oil or peanut oil or something like that, the amount of omega-6s that you're getting is so high that there's going to be increased inflammation, and that's going to accelerate heart disease. It's probably going to play some role in diabetes. It does, research shows, at least in test tubes, I'm sure there's someone's done a research study on larger populations showing that when you give cancer cells omega-6s, they grow faster. So going back to the fish oils, assuming the fish oil has been concentrated and has EPA and DHAs and concentrated, it shouldn't have a lot of, if any, omega-6s. Now, that's assuming these fish are wild fish. If you have farmed salmon and you happen to feed them corn all the time, instead of letting them eat smaller fish that have bioaccumulated the omega-3s from the plankton and the krill or whatever they're eating, then you could, I would imagine, elevate the omega-6 in the salmon. So farm salmon that they're being fed corn would probably just accumulate all the omega-6s because they don't make it. Fish don't make the omega-3s. They accumulate it in their diet. So this is another reason why it's important to eat farm or non-farm fish. It's better off eating the wild salmon for a million different reasons. So I don't really eat, at least I try to avoid eating farm salmon. Another example of this is when you look at grass-fed beef versus corn-fed beef. When you're eating corn-fed beef, it has a beautiful taste. It's nice and marbled. You can see all the fat in it, but that fat is going to be rich in the omega-6s because one, all the sugar in the corn is stimulating the fat production in the meat, and two, it's accumulating all those omega-6s from the corn. And so I believe there's some research that shows that the amount of omega-3s and omega-6s in grass-fed beef is much higher than in the corn-fed beef. I remember seeing it, I just can't quote it right now. And I would think that it's going to be healthier for you and decrease your risk of heart disease, or at least not increase it as much if you're eating corn-fed beef. So that's my theory. There probably needs more research on that. So when it comes to fish and cows, it's better to be, I would say, wild or grass-fed as much as possible. Maybe not the salmon grass-fed, but you know what I mean. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Michael. You're welcome, Owen. So doesn't cortisol cause inflammation? And so cortisol is a stress hormone. When you look at hydrocortisone, which is a form of cortisol, it has a potent anti-inflammatory effect. Whether or not cortisol, it should have a anti-inflammatory effect, but it's complicated. It's not as clear as it's one enzyme. So I would say I'm pretty sure that cortisol has an anti-inflammatory and an immunosuppressant effect in general, but it could also do some other weird things that may not be good for you. So I'm pretty confident it has an anti-inflammatory effect for the most part. Certainly hydrocortisone cream, I can say without a doubt, has its potent anti-inflammatory effect. And if you can find anything to disagree with any point that I make, feel free to bring it up either in class or email me. I'm happy to see them. Okay, it's 10:32. Let's take a 10-minute break right now, and I'll come back at 10:42. And if you have any other questions, write them down. I'll answer them when I get back, and then we'll start on the skin. Okay? See you shortly. Thanks. Okay, so we're back. Just gonna make sure we're recording here. Good, we're still recording. Okay, I had a couple more questions people sent during the break. Um, Alicia says, things like arginine, ornithine, and citrulline are often supplemented to increase the body's nitric oxide levels to increase circulation. Would these be detrimental in terms of inflammation? That's an awesome question, although it's probably better for a nutrition class or a biochemistry class. Um, I would say that everything that you're saying there is correct. These are amino acids or derivatives from amino acids that can be used to make nitric oxide. It does not, these in general, arginine is an amino acid that's rich in nuts and seeds. And so eating a diet rich in walnuts and things like that will have higher amounts of arginine, which is good for the cardiovascular system. It does not appear in the research that I've looked at that taking more arginine in your diet will increase inflammation. That being said, oops, sorry, things are bouncing around here. Where did the questions go? Jane is asking, basically when it comes to fish oils, I'm going to paraphrase, is there concerns about the fish oils becoming oxidized and about how the companies make it? And I would say, again, it's not a herbal class, but I'll say pretty quickly that in general, when you're consuming omega-3s, whether that's flax or chia or hemp, even walnuts and fish oils, if they are exposed to high temperature and oxygen and UV light, they will become oxidized over time. Generally speaking, I usually recommend that people grind their own flax on a regular basis, maybe every week or so, and then keep it in the fridge or in the freezer. Um, Pre-ground flax might be okay, it just increases the risk of it being oxidized. If it's ground and left in your cupboard or left on your countertop exposed to light, it will go rancid. Uh, Fish oils, same sort of thing. When you get fresh fish, it does not smell fishy. Once it becomes oxidized, that's when the fishy smells as the oils start to convert a little bit. So I would say that depending on how they manufacture the fish oils, it's important to me. I don't want to be giving patients rancid fish oils because it could make them sick. So hopefully companies measure the amount of oxidized omega-3s. Often companies will also add in things like an extract from rosemary or other type of antioxidants to try to stabilize, like vitamin E, to try to stabilize the fish oils so they don't go rancid. So I won't talk about that anymore because I don't know a lot about the details, but in general, that's something that I would look for in a company to ask to make sure they're testing, to make sure they're giving you a concentrated form of fish oil that hasn't gone rancid. Okay, so moving on, I think everything looks good. Uh, we can't hear you. It froze. It's working again. All right. I'm going to keep my cell phone on my counter to make sure if somebody needs to reach me, they can in case things aren't working. Okay, so skin. Skin or dermatologic system. There are a number of actions that you can use for skin and musculoskeletal-like conditions. The big overlap between the two. So when it comes to skin, we're going to start off with astringent. So the action astringent refers to the astringency of a particular herb. And when it comes to this action, when something is astringent, what it is it's high in phenolic compounds or high in tannins. So when you think about tannins are found in things like tea. They're also found in green bananas or other types of fruits that aren't ripe. And when you bite into something that's rich in tannins, or you drink a glass of red wine that's really oaky, you'll find that your mouth starts to pucker up, and it's having an effect on the tissues of the mucous membranes in your mouth. And what's going on, the definition of it is it basically causes a contraction of tissues and forms like a cross-linking to those tissues, and that will decrease the permeability of fluids that go in and out of those tissues and helps to increase the resistance and make them a little bit stronger so that they can withstand some kind of physical stress. And where you would use this is if someone, for example, had a wound topically and it didn't stop bleeding, you could use an astringent herb and apply it topically to tighten up those tissues and stop bleeding. And this is why it's related to terms like anti-hemorrhagic or styptic. So we'll talk about styptic in a second, but this has to do with bleeding and being able to stop bleeding. And so most of these astringent compounds are relatively, they tend to be high in phenolic compounds that are not well absorbed. So it's usually when you apply it topically or internally, you're affecting the tissues at the surface. And so if you had some kind of wound that wouldn't stop bleeding or an ulcer that wouldn't heal, you could use an astringent compound to help thicken that wound up. And so the advantage of that is when you have an open wound, it's susceptible to bacterial infections or various types of infections. When you apply an astringent compound, it thickens it up and makes it a protective barrier so that bugs are unable to bind as well to those tissues and infect you. And also by thickening it up, it decreases the trauma so it stops breaking open. So sometimes when people get an ulcer, every time they're walking, it'll just sort of crack the surface of the skin and get it to bleed more. So an astringent can be used to help protect that. So the main indications is going to be for wound healing. If you have a cut or some kind of bruise or an ulcer that won't heal, then you could apply it topically, or you could take it internally. So it could be used for a stomach ulcer or ulcerative colitis or infectious diarrhea where there's a lot of blood involved with it. Another thing you could use it for is if someone had eczema topically where they had cracks and it was oozing fluid. If you applied a little bit of astringent compounds topically, it can kind of help to heal up those cracks and bind them together so that it gives a chance for the eczema to heal over. Also, different types of inflammation of skin, for example, dermatitis, and that could be atopic dermatitis, which is eczema, or it could be other types of dermatitis. Then applying it topically can decrease the inflammation and give it an opportunity to heal up. Also, sometimes when people have varicose veins, when you apply astringent compounds topically in the form of creams or as a compress where you apply the herbs directly to the area, that can help to tighten up the tissues and decrease some of the swelling associated with the varicosities. And then finally, internally using it for stomach ulcers and diarrhea is indicated. And I think one of the things that happens is that astringent compounds are rich in these phenolic compounds, these tannins. We'll talk about them during the phytochemical section more. And what probably is happening is these phenolic compounds and the tannins, they react with the various nitrogens, I think, in the tissues that are found in the proteins, and they form a cross-linking with it. I think that's what's going on. That's the best sort of chemical explanation I can think of. So it causes cross-reactivity, binds to these things, and pulls the tissues together to decrease the bleeding. And when it comes to diarrhea, one of the reasons why you can use it for that is some types of infectious diarrhea will cause like bloody stool because they'll damage the walls of the colon and increase the risk of bleeding. But in addition to that, these astringent compounds will likely react to the exotoxins that are being released by various bugs in the gut that cause diarrhea. And these exotoxins are usually protein-based molecules that will bind to receptors and enzymes in the bowel wall and cause that influx of sodium and various salts into the lumen of the bowel to cause diarrhea. So when you take an astringent compound, I think what it may do is, one, it denatures the enzymes a little bit that it binds to, and two, it will also bind to these toxins, and when it's all bound up with astringent molecules or these phenolic molecules, it may not be able to interact with the various receptors to cause the diarrhea. So it will alter, one, the bowel wall, two, may actually alter the surface of some of these bacteria so they won't stick to the bowels as well, and three, it'll affect the exotoxins. There are many herbs that have an astringent action, and it's to varying degrees. And so the archetypal two herbs are witch hazel and oak, but then a lot of other herbs that contain phenolic compounds will have this effect as well. If you're drinking green tea, for example, or black tea, you'll notice the astringency. Black tea, because of the fermentation and process of it, is much higher in tannins that have been released through the process. And as a result, most people, when they drink black tea, they usually add a little bit of milk to the tea. And the reason why is that when you add the milk, those tannins will bind to the milk proteins and make it so that it's less irritating on the gut. Generally speaking, astringent compounds, although they have a medicinal property and there are some health benefits, consuming excess amounts of astringent compounds orally can irritate the mucous membranes and affect the absorption of various nutrients and affect the permeability of the mucous membranes as well. And this could be a good thing to do acutely to help control an ulcer or diarrhea, or to help with the topical wound. But excess amounts of astringent compounds can be a little bit toxic or affect the absorption of various nutrients. And so you've probably experienced this at some point in your life if you've ever had a glass of red wine that's really oaky, heavy red wine that's oaky. The grapes themselves, the purples and reds that you get in berries and grapes, those anthocyanins have an astringent property associated with them, relatively mild compared to the tannins that you'll get in witch hazel and oak. And there are different types of tannins we'll talk about later on. The condensed tannins you get in grapes and berries, and the condensed or the soluble tannins or the hydrolyzable tannins are usually the ones that you're going to get more in the witch hazel and the oak, and they tend to be a little bit stronger. But if you were to have a glass of red wine that's really oaky on an empty stomach, and you have maybe 1, 2, or 3 of those glasses, and you haven't eaten anything, one, you're probably going to get a little bit loopy from the alcohol, but two, you might get a little bit of gut rot, because what happens is those tannins start to sort of interact with your stomach and the mucous membranes in your GI tract, and it can cause kind of cramping. You might get a little bit of a stomach pain or a little bit of cramping pain associated with it. And so this is why typically people, when you're eating a really big red wine that's oaky, you tend to eat it with a red meat or like a big protein, because those tannins will then interact with the meat and not have a negative effect on your digestive function. Or you might have wine and cheese, so you combine the two together to decrease the reaction of those astringent compounds with your own mucous membrane. So in general, again, like most things, a little bit's okay, but you want to be careful. So witch hazel and oak are your two archetypal ones. Witch hazel is shown on the left. This is when it's flowering. Now, just as an aside for fun, most of the pictures in my slides I've taken, because I love doing photography, and witch hazel, it took me about 5 years to finally get a picture of the flowers, because I didn't realize that it doesn't actually bloom in the spring like most plants. It actually blooms in the fall. And so usually around September, late August, September, October, depending on the year, it produces these interesting little flowers after the leaves, or most of the leaves have fallen off the plant. Witch hazel, you can find it, it's used in a lot of different preparations that are applied topically for things like dermatitis or eczema. It might be used for wound healing, for cuts. You can also use it for hemorrhoids. Internally, it's not used as much, but it does. You could use it. Certainly, historically, it was used for diarrhea and stomach ulcers and things like that. Oak, Now it says here Quercus spp dot. That just means Quercus species. So it could be white oak, it could be red oak, it could be black oak. There's lots of different varieties of oak that exist out there. And oak can be used in herbal medicine, in a tincture extract, or as a powder. It can be used internally and externally for the exact same indications that witch hazel is used for. There's not a lot of difference between the two. Also, when you're drinking red wine, the way that they infuse the wine with oak is they store them in barrels that have been made from oak. So that's where you get that astringency from the oak. The next action, some of these actions will go much quicker because we've sort of given a little bit of background on the previous slide. So Styptic is an action, and basically this is a substance that when applied topically to the skin, it's used to stop bleeding. So these are astringent compounds that are applied topically, and so again, it's related to astringent compounds or anti-hemorrhagic actions. It's used primarily for cuts and also for bleeding ulcers. Again, witch hazel and oak are two archetypal ones that are used for that. There are lots of other herbs that have a styptic property to it, but we're just focusing on this. Another example of this, of a chemical styptic, is if you go into the drugstore, you can buy a styptic stick or a shaving stick, and these are little sticks or little cubes that typically aluminum hydroxide is a chemical styptic, and so if you cut yourself shaving, instead of putting toilet paper all over your face, you could rub a styptic stick on it, and it will basically cause contraction of those tissues to stop the bleeding. So you can use herbal or chemical styptics. Now the next medicinal action are vulneraries. Now what vulnerary herbs do is they can be used both internally and externally. So either for your, they don't get into your blood as much, but typically internally for stomach ulcers and colitis and things like that, or topically for bruises or wounds that are having troubles healing, or ulcers or cuts. And they speed up or they hasten the healing of these wounds. And I would say that a lot of these are related to anti-inflammatory herbs as well, because maybe the process of inflammation is usually used to help tissues repair from damage or some kind of trauma that's occurred to the tissues. And vulneraries, although they don't fully suppress inflammation in the body, or maybe they have some anti-inflammatory effects, but they also modulate some of these various reactions to speed up the healing. So I find the vulnerary herbs are used, let's say if you got a really bad cut on your face, or you squeezed a pimple and it was really red and you had to go on a date, in a few days on Friday or whatever, and you wanted to speed up quickly, that's where I might use a vulnerary herb. Or if someone's got a bruise and they want to, that's on their face, you might use something like that. So you could use it for cosmetic reasons, just to look better. Or in the elderly, often they'll have troubles with wounds that just won't heal as well, because when you get older, circulation's not as good, and everything just doesn't function the same. So you could use a vulnerary with elderly patients if they bump their knee or bang into something, then they can apply it topically. So internally, there are certain vulnerary that are used to help with stomach ulcers and to help heal the gut another way. So the main indications for soft tissues, wounds, cuts, burns, bruises, eczema, ulcers, or for hard tissue injuries, so sprains, so you've sort of torn a tendon or a ligament for sprains and strains, or if, let's say, if you broke a bone and you want to heal it faster, then for various fractures of bones, and you could use vulneraries for that as well. Now, in general, there are some vulneraries that are safe to apply both internally, or apply topically and take it internally. And there's others that you can only use externally because there are some safety concerns associated with them. So marigold or calendula, I got the order mixed up here. Let's do the external ones first. Arnica, which is I don't know if you can hear, there's someone just started hammering outside my window. That's really irritating. Arnica is the archetypal herb used for bruises. In homeopathic remedy, it's used for musculoskeletal damage, bruises, wound healing, and it has a number of anti-inflammatory and vulnerary actions associated with it. It's also been used for conditions like arthritis and applied topically. Now, it does have some toxic compounds that is one of the reasons why you should not be consuming it internally, because it can have a negative effect on your heart. So when it comes to arnica preparations, I recommend you only use it topically. And if you have a large open wound where there's a lot of exposed tissues or you're bleeding, arnica is not indicated. It's only indicated for closed wounds, because you can also absorb some of the negative or some of the toxic compounds through open wounds. So arnica, one thing to remember, bruise. Comfrey, also called symphytum, is the Latin name. Comfrey is one of the other common names for it is knit bone. So it's the archetypal herb used to help with bone damage and tissue and issues with bones. So any kind of fractures or cracks in bones, applying comfrey topically can help with that. It does contain a compound called pyrrolizidine, or compounds called pyrrolizidine alkaloids that may cause damage to the liver. So Health Canada has put a warning saying that comfrey should only be consumed or only applied topically and should not be consumed orally. Now, as an aside, it has been used historically by herbalists. They've taken comfrey internally for short periods of time and not had any major issues, but I wouldn't take those risks. So, if you're going to remember one indication for each one: arnica, bruises; comfrey, bones. Now, saying that, you can use comfrey topically for dermatitis, to help with wound healing as well, topically, and a few other things. So there are other indications for it as well, but remembering one good indication is good. Now, for the ones that you can use internally or externally, marigold is kind of the classic, or calendula is the classic herb used for burns and for wound healing. So if someone's cut themselves or they've got an ulcer or some kind of scab, then you can apply marigold oil or extract topically, or calendula. It's often referred to as calendula. You can apply it topically and it'll speed up the healing of the wound. And chamomile is another herb that's I would say its main indication is for digestive complaints. So it's used to help with things like stomach ulcers and colic in children. But it's also used topically to help heal ulcers and wounds and eczema and a number of other things. So I would say that marigold and chamomile are used for almost the same indications. Normally, I think of marigold as something I prefer to use topically, and chamomile is more the archetypal vulnerary I use internally. Burns, bruises, things like that. So a lot of these vulneraries that we discussed, they could be used interchangeably. I think the only really important distinction is to realize is that arnica should only be used externally, and comfrey, although it has been used internally, it's best to use it only for external purposes. We'll talk about the safety concerns later on a little bit more. Here's a few different little trials. Like, you don't need to know this. It just talks about the wound healing effect of symphytum extract. So you'll find that sometimes comfrey or symphytum is used topically to help heal various wounds. Another study showed that comfrey, when applied topically as a gel, was shown to have some benefit for ankle sprains. So it was actually shown to be superior over diclofenac, which is an anti-inflammatory drug in the treatment of distortion. So that's just some evidence that shows there may be some benefits to these things. Now, another action that can apply to both internal and external conditions is anti-ulcerogenic, which basically means helps to prevent the formation of ulcers, or anti-ulcer, which basically helps maybe prevent and speeds up the healing of the ulcers. This action is associated a lot with astringent and vulnerary herbs because if you have an ulcer that won't heal, often things that have an astringent nature to it will create a protective barrier or like a new layer of like skin on top of it, and then the vulnerary phytochemicals will help speed it up. So they kind of work in conjunction with one another. So some herbs will have both properties. Other herbs will have only one property. You have to find another herb that, like, for example, oak is primarily an astringent. It could be classified as a vulnerary to some degree, but I would not necessarily put it in that category myself. So the main systems that this applies to is when you're looking at skin, musculoskeletal, but also gastrointestinal systems. So if someone had a stomach ulcer or also ulcerative colitis, then you could apply this to it as well. So your main indications for this is ulcers and general wound healing. You can look at the vulnerary and astringent herbs for some examples, but most of those that we've discussed will have this anti-ulceroprotective, anti-ulcerogenic effects or an anti-ulcer. Now, if you just, here's an example. Dragon's blood is a herb that comes from Central and South America. And when you're looking at this plant in the wild, now you can't generally find this in North America. So I apologize for giving you a herb that grows in Central and South America that you won't be able to get your hands on, but I'm hoping in the future we'll be able to get more of it up here. I've used this in the past when I brought some back from the Amazon. I've used it topically for various skin ulcers. And what's interesting about this plant is when you make an incision in the side of the tree, this red latex, which looks like blood, kind of comes oozing out of it. And this is the substance that you collect and you apply it topically to wounds. Now, on the right-hand side, this is a patient that I had who had venous insufficiency, and I don't know what was causing the issue, but here you can see large ulcers on his leg. Now, well, I've been seeing him for years, and typically what happens is these ulcers will come up. You can see there's raw and exposed tissue underneath it. It's kind of a little bit of scabbing. These will remain open for a while. Sometimes they'll get infected, and then eventually these ones might close up, and then another one will spread up in a different spot. And it gets aggravated when he's doing too much standing and a few other things. This patient, there's no way you can really cure the condition because there's something, I guess, anatomically wrong with his veins, but certainly elevating the legs can help the fluid drain. And I would also say that vulnerary and astringent herbs could help with this individual. Now with him, he found a lot of relief from using dragon's blood that I brought back for him. And so when we applied the dragon's blood topically, you can watch and see. You can see this is after only a couple seconds of applying it. It immediately forms this thickening, nice barrier on his skin. And you can see that those tissues, all we did was literally just put the liquid on and just press it on with the finger, and it just tightens it up. And now it makes it an impermeable barrier so that infections are likely to reduce, and it speeds up the healing significantly. So this guy was very passionate about how effective this dragon's blood was. It did not cure him, but it certainly helped prevent these ulcers from getting worse, sped up the healing of them, and really helped with his condition. So I think that's just a really neat little picture. Now, another action we're going to talk about is anti-pruritic. And if you just hold on one second, I just got to look out my window and see what's going on out there. Hold on. Okay, well, I'm sorry. It happens to be that right underneath my window, they're doing construction on the road. So that's one unfortunate thing. They've never done this before, and I guess today's the day. So I'm sorry this is happening. If you can hear it in the background, it's very distracting for me. But anyways, another action we'll talk about is anti-pruritic. Now, in Latin, pruritus in medical terms means itchiness, And so an anti-pruritic helps to relieve the itch sensation. And this can be related to herbs that have an anodyne or analgesic effect. So anodynes basically means it decreases pain when applied topically. And so the anti-pruritic action is associated primarily with the skin, a little bit to the musculoskeletal herbs will overlap with that a bit. And so where someone might want to use an anti-pruritic herb is if they were, let's say, bit by a mosquito, or if they had eczema or poison ivy where there's some sort of immune reaction going on that's causing a relief of histamine or other various cytokines that causes sort of itchiness to the area. Also, when people come in contact with things like stinging nettles, you might want to apply something topically to help with that. Now, there are several herbs that could be used to provide symptomatic relief. Now, oatmeal, so the same thing that you eat for breakfast, or some people eat for breakfast, oatmeal is considered to be an anti-pruritic herb, and you may see that there are a number of moisturizers on the market that contain Avena sativa extracts, and these products are particularly useful just as a moisturizer because one, they're rich in fiber, so it has a slimy mucilaginous sort of consistency to it, but two, they have excuse me, it contains some phytochemicals that are phenolic in nature that have been shown to decrease the itch sensation and have a bit of an anti-inflammatory and maybe a vulnerary property as well. And so oatmeal, when applied topically, can help relieve the itch of certain types of things, like eczema, for example, or poison ivy. I would say acutely it's worth trying that. One of the ways that you can do it is you can just grind up oatmeal that you buy, like steel cut oats, grind it in your blender, add some water to it, and just apply it as like a paste to the skin or to the area that's affected. And it works well for that. Or you could maybe buy a moisturizer that contains it if it's more for an eczema that already has it extracted, so it's not too difficult to apply. You can also do oatmeal baths where you fill up the bathtub with warm water and just throw in a whole bunch of oatmeal. Some people will put it inside a like a piece of nylon or a cloth to keep it contained. I will just grind it up and then just throw it all the like just make a porridge right in the bathtub. And if it's ground, it's a little bit easier to clean. But my advice is after you're done in the bath, drain the water and make sure you rinse it immediately so that it doesn't start to dry and stick to the bathtub, because once it sticks, you're never going to get it off. It's going to be really tough. Well, you will get it off. It's just going to require a lot more work. So oatmeal is one mechanism. Another mechanism is you could use herbs or just use essential oils and apply them topically. So when you look at, for example, muscle creams that are rich in things like camphor, menthol, eucalyptus, you can buy these at the drugstore, also at natural health food stores. These products generally, because they're rich in these essential oils, what happens when you take these certain essential oils is that they'll bind to hot and cold receptors in your body. So we've got receptors for pain, for pressure, also for temperature in the body. And so, for example, menthol or camphor, if you've ever experienced the essential oils topically or internally, it has a cooling effect to the tissues. So you take some kind of cough drop that has lots of menthol and eucalyptus in it, and you breathe in deep, and it just feels like you're inhaling cold air. So it doesn't actually decrease the temperature in those tissues. It just stimulates the receptors to make you feel like you've decreased the temperature. Same thing as cayenne. It stimulates hot receptors, and so when you do that, you feel like you've consumed something that's hot because it has that warming sort of feeling. And what that basically is doing is by stimulating the hot or the cold receptors, your brain's getting the signal that that there's some kind of change in temperature. Now, the benefit of that is if you've got an itchy sensation on your skin, let's say due to a mosquito bite or to eczema, or you've just got some kind of general pruritus going on, or hives, for example, where you might have like a mild allergic reaction or something's irritating you, you've got hives on your body. Applying an essential oil topically, what it'll do is it'll stimulate these hot and cold receptors in your body, and the idea is that the message going to the brain now is going to be cold sensation. And your brain is not very good at taking in too many sensations at once. So one of the reasons why, for example, if you stub your toe or you bump your hand, you rub the area, or if you've got an itch, you scratch it. The reason why we do that is because by scratching or rubbing or applying cold in the form of ice or chemical cold in the form of essential oils, it overrides the pain or the itch sensation, and as a result, it ends up decreasing the itch sensation that's going to the brain. So all you feel is cold. So you're kind of masking the itch or the pain and replacing it with a temperature sensation. And this is one of the indications for counter-irritants, how they work. And they basically kind of irritate the skin by, like, essential oils will do this, or cayenne will do this. Irritates the skin, increases blood flow to the area, and can help to relieve pain by a couple of different mechanisms. But one of the bits by this distraction technique. So oatmeal is one example of an anti-pruritic. It doesn't have that hot and cold sensation mechanism. It works by a different mechanism. Moving on, alterative. I've mentioned this herbal action in the past, and you will not find this in the pharmaceutical textbooks. It's kind of unique to herbal medicine, and it's an old medical term dating back thousands of years, back to the Greco-Roman time. Alterative are herbs that basically help cleanse the blood. And so it's sort of this vague term where by working on promoting metabolism and removal of waste products from the body, it helps normalize the function of the body, and in particular it can help with skin conditions. And so one of the things that alternatives are used for is that if someone has an unknown skin condition, or it could be something like eczema or acne, often alternatives are recommended because by cleansing the blood, you can help improve skin conditions. Because the belief in a lot of different forms of medicine is that if you've got a lot of toxic built up in it, I think a lot of critics of natural medicine say, what are you talking about, these toxins? But just in vague terms, toxins, just meaning something that's your body should get rid of, whether that's hormones or whether that's chemicals or whatever it is, waste products. If you have a buildup of waste products in the body, it can interfere with various processes, and as a result, if the routes of elimination for these toxins is somehow backlogged, so the liver, the bowels, the urine, or the kidney, if they're not working optimally, then these waste products, if they can't be removed through one mechanism, then your body tries to release it through the skin, and this would be an explanation for some people getting skin issues. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm okay using that operating system or that idea in treating things. So one thing that I find is that, for example, a lot of women who experience some, I would say, sluggish bowels or chronic constipation, it's not uncommon to see that they tend to get a lot of pimples, or their skin seems a little bit irritated or inflamed. And it may be that if the liver and the bowels aren't functioning properly, the hormones like the various estrogens and things aren't being eliminated fast enough, and as a result, they're being recirculated and then having some sort of negative effect on the oil-producing glands in the skin, or maybe they have more of an androgenic effect and increases acne. So I do think that working on the bowels and the liver is beneficial for people who have skin conditions. It may not be the only thing. I don't think that everyone who has acne has dirty skin. When it comes to acne, I think you really need to focus also on looking at the diet and removing things that could be contributing there. So for years, dermatologists say that diet has nothing to do with skin. I think that's ridiculous. We know that research shows there is a connection with, for example, people who are consuming high amounts of dairy, in particular more so with the milk than the cheese. I think you see an aggravation in acne. I remember when I was in high school, I always seemed to have acne. I was healthy, and I used to drink like a liter of milk a day because I thought it was good for me. And then when I went off to university, I stopped drinking milk because I was too lazy to lug home the milk because I had to walk with it, and I didn't drink milk anymore my acne cleared up. Now, I don't know if it was just because I got older or if it was because I stopped drinking milk, but I certainly think there's a connection. And in private practice, the number one food sensitivity is milk, and typically the whey component of the milk. Cheese is less of an issue, but milk certainly is a big issue. And so anyone who comes in who's got acne, I want them to remove milk and dairy from their diet for a trial period to see if there's an improvement. And other food sensitivities might also play a role. So I might work on that. And then we want to decrease sugar, because sugar will have all sorts of hormonal effects on the body. Increase fruits and vegetables, maybe give them some things like flaxseed, which has good oils in it. It also has fiber. It also has lignans that can help balance hormones in the body. They may indirectly help to improve the skin. So those are a bunch of different examples. Now, herbs that are specifically used for skin conditions are alteratives, and various kind of a couple classic alteratives is burdock root and yellow dock. Now, burdock root, which is shown on the left there, is actually kind of a pretty little plant. There's a number of compounds in this. It contains lignans. It contains different types of fibers. It's been shown to have some estrogenic or phytoestrogenic effects. It's been shown to have some anti-inflammatory effects. It affects the gut flora to some degree. It's a very benign herb. In Japan, they use gobo, which is a type of Artica malapa that's grown more as a vegetable. And so the root is cut up and stewed and steamed and eaten as a vegetable. And if you go to some of the health food stores that have a little food bar dispenser, food cafeteria with them, you can often get little dishes that contain burdock root. Also, burdock, it can be safely consumed as a tea on a daily basis on high amounts. I'm not concerned about this. So when you're looking at herbs, I think this is a very safe herb that can be consumed on a regular basis and get a lot of benefits from doing that. In addition, it's been shown to have some anti-cancer effects and some other things. So on the spectrum, this is more like a food, kind of like how chamomile tea would be. I don't mind if people consume this every single day for the rest of their life. No problems with that. Now, on the right-hand side, you see yellow. Oh, and just as an aside with the burdock root, those little flowers that you see, those little thistle-like things, those are the burrs. And these are the same burrs that in the summer, as they dry out, they will stick to your clothes when you're walking around in the woods or in a field. And then you'll carry these little burrs around, and then eventually they'll fall off, or you'll pull them off and drop them somewhere else. And it's a way that the plant spreads the seeds around. So these burrs, I'm sure if any of you have spent any time outside in Canada or North America, you've got them on your sweaters or your jackets, and you know what I'm talking about. So although it's an annoying little plant, it's a good medicinal plant, and it grows pretty much everywhere. On the right-hand side, we've got a picture of yellow dock. Yellow dock, as it dries in sort of July, early August, it takes on this distinctive sort of presentation where the seeds become kind of brown and dark. It's not very attractive looking. In the spring, it's usually green. Now, burdock is in the same family as rhubarb, and there's some other things like green dock, sour dock, which are vegetables, are in the same family as well. Yellow dock, it contains compounds called anthraquinone glycosides. It's very similar to stimulating laxatives like Senna. So if you think of Senna, we'll talk about these later on. So it has a very mild laxative-like effect. It's more gentle than other ones, but it does have that property associated with it. And there's a number of antimicrobial effects associated as well. So the way that I look at yellow dock is that it's primarily used as an alterative when the bowels are a little bit sluggish, and you want a nice, gentle laxative to get things moving, because, let's say, drinking more water and diet alone isn't having the effects, but they're not fully constipated. So I might use this for people with chronic skin stuff, do it for a period of time. It's a relatively safe herb, but it's still not something I would want somebody taking on a daily basis. We know that other anthraquinone glycosides can be habit forming. I think this is gentle. I don't mind using it for a couple weeks at a time, but it's not something I want somebody consuming as a tea on a daily basis. It's just not indicated. So yellow dock is more for a short term, maybe for a few weeks, maybe a month, to kind of help get the skin under control and or whatever kind of issue that they have. I know that it works on the liver. It may stimulate the production of bile and the release of bile. It will also work on the bowels, has an antimicrobial effect. There's not a lot of research on this one, so we're using it more based on its historical indications. I can sort of deduce, based on research done on other plants that can contain similar phytochemicals, how it might work. But we don't know precisely how it does. So those are two archetypal examples of alternatives. There are other alternatives that exist out there. A lot of the herbs that have an antimicrobial effect or work on the liver often are classified as alternatives, but not always. So I think everybody knows that your lymphatic tissues, or the lymph in your body, is void of the red blood cells and contains a lot of the immune cells, and it's involved with basically helping move lymphatic tissue around. And so lymphatic herbs have an affinity for the lymphatic system, and they're used primarily when there's swelling in the body or edema in the body, because there's some kind of issue with the circulation. Also, when people have swollen lymph nodes, and when you have swollen lymph nodes, it's usually associated with some type of infection. So a lot of the lymphatics are used to help cleanse the blood, so many of them are classified as alternatives. A lot of these are also used to treat viral infections, both acutely or chronically, so it might be used for, let's say, things like mono, or if you had swollen lymph nodes acutely because of some type of skin condition. Sometimes we see with cystic acne that there may be lymph nodes swollen with that, so you may use a little bit of a lymphatic for that. Also, some chronic skin infections, it may be used. Some other example would be, historically, a lot of these were used for exanthemus or viral infections. So these would be things like measles, where you get like a skin infection going on with swollen lymph nodes. So both viral and bacterial infections, you could use this as an adjunctive herb in formula. So I might throw a little bit of these into other types of formulas. Now, gallium, on the left-hand side, this grows wild. It's often used in lymphatic formulas. It's also used historically in the old books to treat urinary tract infections and sexually transmitted diseases. It's also used for other viral skin conditions as well. I think it's a relatively safe herb, and I don't have any major concerns with it. Poke root, which is shown on the right-hand side, it's quite an interesting looking plant. Phytolacca americana is the Latin name for it. This plant, I use it, and it's one of the few plants that the dose of this is much lower than the other dose of the plants that we've discussed. And I would sort of say, of all the herbs that we're going to learn about, this would be one that you want to use with caution. If you took too much of it, you would end up getting nausea and vomiting and diarrhea, and it will have a cathartic effect, which isn't very pleasant. And a lot of herbs are usually, it might be like half a teaspoon or a teaspoon 1 to 3 times a day. With poke root, the dose is very precise. It may only be 1 mil 3 times a day maximum, or maybe, I can't remember what the dosage is off the top of my head. It's one I always double check the dose. Chamomile I don't worry too much, but poke root I do, because I know it can make you feel a little bit nauseous or make the patient feel a little bit crummy if you put too much of it. So you definitely don't want to add equal parts of poke root with other herbs. You wouldn't do equal parts of poke root with something like dandelion or burdock root and phytolacca. I think that would just it would be too much of it. Things like burdock, you can use pretty high amounts of it safely. Poke root, you cannot. Now, an emollient, This term is also used in cosmetics. It's also used in the pharmaceutical world. An emollient is often referred to as a moisturizer, so it helps to soften and smooth the skin. Topically, you probably use this for dry skin and for eczema. For the most part, a lot of the things that have a moisturizing effect often have a lot of fiber. It's a demulcent-like effect, so when you add water to it, it kind of soaks up the water and has like a sponge-like effect. So it can be things that are rich in demulcents and fiber. Other things like oatmeal would fall into that category, and so applying oatmeal topically in the form of a skincare product would act as an emollient. But also things like olive oil, which doesn't contain any water, it's 100% water, would have a moisturizing effect. So usually if someone has dry skin, you want to use a combination of oil and water to have the best sort of moisturizing effects. Too much of oil alone will just leave your skin looking greasy. So a lot of creams, aqueous-based creams and lotions, usually will have a mixture of both water and oil in it to have a beneficial effect. Sometimes if someone has very severe dry skin, cracking skin, then you might apply an oil topically or even Vaseline topically to have a protective barrier. So if I know that people are doing a lot of outdoor activities, they may apply Vaseline to their skin to try to protect it from the wind and from to have that really harsh drying effect. So oils will have more of a protective effect when applied that way. Next term is Escharotic. Now, in Latin, an eschar means a scab. And so if you've ever cut yourself, you know as it heals, you'll get all this dead skin that sort of will accumulate and then fall off. An Escharotic herb is a herb that basically it's toxic. It destroys the tissue and produces a scab that'll eventually fall off. And so this is not something you want to use on a daily basis. You wouldn't want to include Escharotic herbs in your moisturizing cream. You wouldn't want to take these things internally in high amounts because it's toxic. Where we use Escharotic herbs is primarily for burning off, like as a herbal burn to kill warts or other lesions that aren't desirable. They've been used historically for different types of cancer, like skin cancer or even breast cancer. And so, personally, I would, if I had some lesion that I wanted to remove, like a type of skin cancer, I would want a dermatologist to look after that. However, I've treated a lot of warts with Escharotic herbs successfully, and I've had patients that have seen medical doctors and or nurse practitioners, and they were referred to me because the liquid nitrogen that they typically use, or the chemicals that they were using, often they'll use things like salicylic acid, high amounts, same thing that you get in willow bark, to burn off lesions. I've had the herbal Escharotics work better than the conventional ones. And so when I worked at Parkdale Community Health Center in Toronto, I worked there for about 10 years and then just stopped a couple of years ago. One of the nurse practitioners always had troubles with one or two patients with their warts, and they would always refer them over to us. And two of the herbs that are great with Escharotic herbs are bloodroot and mayapple. And bloodroot, when you break, this grows locally around here. It comes up in the springtime, produces these nice white flowers. One of the first plants that grows in the spring. And if you dig up the roots and you break them in half, you'll see the root oozes this red latex. And you can basically cut that root into little small slivers and apply it topically to a wart, and it will just help to burn it off. You can also make a tincture of this with some other herbs and apply it topically to burn them off as well. I find mayapple also a very potent herb. It contains a phytochemical that's been turned into an anti-cancer drug. It's not used routinely, but it is in the pharmaceutical realm. And it inhibits mitosis, or inhibits meiosis, I can't remember which one. It inhibits cell replication. and that's why it's used as an anti-cancer drug. But also topically, when you apply it to various lesions like warts and skin cancer, it'll burn them off. I would say that bloodroot and mayapple, neither one of these are generally available in health food stores. I know that some of the herbal manufacturers are no longer selling these, so you might have to do a special order or make it yourself. I make it myself just because I know how to find bloodroot and identify mayapple, and it grows everywhere around here. And so I often will have a formula for warts that I'll combine bloodroot, mayapple, cedar, and lomatium in roughly equal parts. And then what I'll do is I'll get the patient to apply it topically to the warts on a daily basis. And it typically takes a couple of weeks, and you'll see about a 50% reduction in the wart, and works pretty good. Now, the problem with these is you have to be very careful, because Escharotic herbs, they're basically toxic that cause chemical burns, and so you don't want to get in your eye. I would be very careful. I don't think I'd want to use it for warts on the genitals necessarily without communicating to the patient. You have to be careful with them. They do work, but they can cause damage to the tissues, and if you apply too much of it, you could cause some scarring and pain to the area. So you need to treat Escharotic herbs with a lot of respect. Just so you know, there's historically black salves were used that contain things like bloodroot and mayapple, and they also mixed in, I think it was zinc, zinc hydroxide. I can't think of the chemical. There's some kind of chemical that they applied with it, and they would use it basically to do chemical surgery on various types of tumors. And so some old school herbalists or naturopaths have used this in the past. I know it does work, but it basically destroys the tissue and can cause a lot of pain. And I just think, why not let a surgeon do this if they can? So too many risks associated with using this as the first line. So the only real indication I use it for is warts. So musculoskeletal system, I'm going to go through this. This will be a little bit quicker than the other ones. When it comes to this, one of the main actions is an anti-rheumatic. So this is used primarily to relieve rheumatisms. Now, rheumatisms includes things like arthritis, muscle pain, but also conditions like fibromyalgia will sometimes get thrown in with rheumatic conditions. Most of the herbs used to treat arthritis have an anti-inflammatory effect. So anti-rheumatic herbs, I think, always have some sort of anti-inflammatory effects associated with it. Classic herbs that are often used for this purpose: turmeric, devil's claw, frankincense, willow bark would be some examples, and we've already discussed those. Now, analgesics are sometimes associated with anti-inflammatory actions, because if you decrease inflammation, it has an effect on pain messengers in the body, but not always. So an analgesic is a substance that alleviates pain without causing a loss of consciousness. So for example, an anesthetic, like a general anesthetic, usually causes the person to become unconscious and pass out, which is very different than taking an NSAID drug or some anti-inflammatory herb. So this is used primarily for pain. A lot of the herbs that we've already discussed that have an anti-rheumatic effect or an anti-inflammatory effect can work for this. So willow bark decreases pain, turmeric can decrease pain. Also common opium. Now on the left-hand side you see an opium poppy, and the way they obtain the opium is they put little incisions in the pod, the opium pod. It oozes out that white latex, which then is scraped off, and you get opium from it. And then opium can be further extracted, or synthetic opioids would be things like, or they may obtain from this, might be codeine, or synthetic ones might be methadone. So there's no doubt that opium has a powerful effect on pain. We don't ever use this in herbal medicine, but historically they do. In some places like the Middle East, Egypt, Middle East, Afghanistan, as a part of the folk medicine there, they may just say, make a tea with the opium poppies. I even know a colleague of mine who is from Egypt, and they used to say, oh, when the kids were acting up and and wouldn't fall asleep. Sometimes the parents would make a little tea with some with the opium pods. They would be getting very small amounts of the opium, but enough just to sort of knock them out. And one of the side effects of opium and other opiates is if you take high amounts, or even just small amounts, it'll make you a bit sleepy. And if you take super high amounts, then you overdose and you die because your nervous system shuts down, you stop breathing. So right now we have got a major opiate crisis in I would say, Canada and North America because of all the abuse associated with this. And it all comes from this beautiful little plant that grows. Most of it probably comes from the Middle East and Afghanistan right now. And you also get parts of China, Thailand, Burma, Laos. You can find it growing in those areas as well. So very dangerous plant, but also very effective if you need to control someone's pain. Willow and the other anti-inflammatory drugs work by an entirely different mechanism. So other than possibly causing a stomach ulcer, you're not going to have the addiction associated with it. And anodyne is related to the analgesic. In herbal books, it usually refers to a substance that helps to relieve pain when applied topically. So it's usually a topical analgesic. When it comes to this, there's lots of different things that you could use this for. So if someone had like joint pain or muscle pain or various neuropathies, so damage to the nerves causing nerve pain, this is where you might use a topical anodyne. And so the essential oils that we discussed earlier on, peppermint oils or wintergreen oil, camphor oils, eucalyptus oils, these essential oils, when you apply them topically, will stimulate various temperature-sensitive receptors, causing a hot and cold sensation. So just like with the anti-pruritic sensation, if you've got pain going to your brain and you apply something topically that makes the area cold or hot, it distracts from the pain that's going on there. Wintergreen, like the wintergreen gum, this grows locally, usually underneath pine trees. I think I took this photo when I was camping in Algonquin Park, but it also grows around here underneath the pine trees. It contains methylsalicylic acid, which is also found in a lot of sports creams that are applied topically to help athletes if they're in a lot of pain. Camphor laurel, this is a picture of the camphor tree. It's a cousin of cinnamon, and this is where camphor comes from. And probably if anyone's had a sport cream, things like various bombs, tiger bombs and things like that, have a lot of camphor and wintergreen in it, giving it that sort of aromatic, cooling, or spicy-like action associated with it. Eucalyptus and peppermint oil, you'll find this is in a lot of sports creams. It's taken both internally and topically in relative amounts. So eucalyptol, menthol, it stimulates those cold receptors to have that distracting effect in the body. And so there are a couple different, this is a side note, there's a couple of receptors in your body, like TRPM8 receptors are activated by specific chemicals like menthol and camphor to make your brain think that you're cold. So you're not actually cold, it just sort of has that cooling like action. And medicinally, peppermint oil and camphor oil can be used to decrease pain in muscles. It can suppress the cough reflex, and it can also be used to relieve the itch, as we mentioned before. And one of the ways that it does that is by overriding those pain sensations with cold sensations. Now I think I have, I'll get to a diagram of this in a second. Arubifacient, ruba means red in Latin, so arubifacient is a substance that basically causes the capillaries to dilate, and it increases blood flow to the area, making the skin red. So if you've ever applied essential oils topically to your skin, or you might apply mustard oil or cayenne, you'll see that the area becomes red, and as a result, this does a couple things. One, it stimulates the hot receptors in the skin, and two, it gets the blood flowing to the area to remove stagnation. And so this is often used for muscle and joint pain as well. A counter-irritant is related to the rubefacient and also to the topical anodynes in that it causes irritation to the skin, and it could be stimulating the hot receptors or cold receptors. As a byproduct, it typically causes the capillaries to dilate, so more blood goes into the area. That's by irritating those tissues. And these are used to treat joint pain, muscle pain, the let's say, diabetic neuropathies, so nerve pains, also insect bites. So it's all that same mechanism that we've described already, where, for example, here is cayenne. Cayenne, it doesn't bind to cold receptors, it binds to hot receptors. And these are called the transient receptor potential vanilloids, or TRPV1 receptors, that basically are stimulated by noxious heat or really pungent chemicals. So I remember once I wasn't sprayed by a skunk, but there was a skunk that got in a cat fight right underneath my window about 4 feet away from me when I was sleeping, and sprayed, I guess, lots of sulfur in it. And it's amazing. I've never been that close to a skunk when it's sprayed before. Instantly, you can feel that noxious substance. It causes your heart to start pounding, your bronchioles dilate, you start to tear and cry. I didn't throw up, but I thought I was going to. You can just stimulate the cough reflex. It's quite potent. And so that would be another example of that. So things that have a pungent-like effect in the body that cause you to feel warm, so if you eat spicy food with cayenne or clove or cinnamon, so the little red cinnamon candy hearts, or ginger, all that kind of pungent, warm sort of effect they have is related to the fact they're stimulating these hot receptors in the body called the TRPV1s and stimulating that. Now, another thing that happens with things like cayenne is that when you apply it topically, it stimulates the receptors to have a warming effect, but over time it depletes a pain messenger in the body called substance P. And so this neuropeptide is involved in the transmission of pain, and with repeated application over, let's say, several days, after a week or so, you have a beneficial effect of relieving pain in general. So it works by a couple different mechanisms. Now, really quickly, we've already touched on this, but normally you get a pain signal that goes directly to the brain. And when you apply something that stimulates the hot or cold receptors, and also I'd say acupuncture has the same sort of effect, what ends up happening is that the brain then, through stimulating these cold receptors, it competes for, it's like your brain can only take in so many messages, so it competes because it has a stronger signal, goes to the brain, and in the process shuts off the pain from going to the brain. So as a result, you feel only the cold sensation on your, let's say, sore muscles, not the actual muscle pain because you overworked and you tore the muscles or there's an injury. Or if you get bitten by a mosquito, if you apply essential oils topically, or some people will scratch at it, or I know there's another trick where people will use a thumbnail and put a cross on it, like kind of causing a little bit of trauma to the area. And by doing that, you're basically overriding the itch sensation with either pain, cold, or whatever. Another example of this is when I got used to go hiking, at stinging nettles all over my legs, and they were really itchy. We knew to go and stand in an ice cold stream because that numbing sensation from the cold water would help to override the cold or the itch sensation until finally the stinging nettles wore off. So, just as an aside, castor oil you can also use it as a topical analgesic. Although it doesn't stimulate the hot receptors like you get with the cayenne, it does deplete substance P in a similar way. And so I've used castor oil topically to help relieve joint pain. It's a bit messy and goopy, but it does have some beneficial effects there. 11:51. Okay, so I ended this right on time. I'm going to check the questions really quickly if you want to stick around for a couple more seconds. And if you don't want to, that's fine. Let me just look at my questions quickly here. I have a handful of them. Okay. So Ju Young says, hello, could you please elaborate how vulnerary herbs help hasten healing of bone damage, or fractures, I would say. Thank you. We don't know what the mechanism is. I'm assuming that they affect some sort of, they have some sort of modulating effect on the bone remodeling process. So when someone breaks a bone, you might be able to apply comfrey around the areas to sort of hopefully get a little bit of absorption of some of those compounds to have a therapeutic effect. So I can't comment on it. It's been used historically. I've used it with patients. I think it helps. Most of the research is mainly on helping to relieve like something like comfrey. Most of the research is related to speeding up the healing of skin issues and decreasing inflammation. So we know, I've seen some studies that show comfrey applied topically helps with osteoarthritis, but I don't think anyone's done any trials to show it hastens the speeding of fractures, bone fractures, but I don't see any harm in it. So that's the best I can say. Someone's asking about astringent herbs. I'm curious, what kind of astringent or vulnerary substances would you suggest to a patient, for example, with ulcerative colitis should take? Could the astringent compound affect the absorption of pharmaceutical drugs? So someone with ulcerative colitis, if they have this thing going on chronically, I wouldn't be giving astringents herbs to them. What I would be doing is I would start off by focusing primarily on the diet, removing food sensitivities. I would give anti-inflammatory herbs like turmeric. The only time I would consider giving an astringent herb to someone with severe ulcerative colitis might be just acutely to try to get the bleeding in check. You could use gentle astringents like bilberry, which is a cousin of blueberry, which can be used for that. But you have to use caution. And the big thing is it would potentially affect the absorption of certain pharmaceutical drugs and certainly minerals. So yeah, you'd want to use caution. It's not the primary approach I would take for ulcerative colitis, but you could use it to acutely try to get things under control. And that was from Michael. Anna is asking, would you recommend a Mediterranean diet for someone who has skin issues, eczema, acne, psoriasis? I would start with, I think the Mediterranean diet is a great diet for people with skin issues, just in general, eating healthy and eating more fruits and vegetables, moderate amounts of meat, some omega-3s, less processed foods in general is good advice for anyone. And then I would probably tweak it and give a few specific recommendations. But Mediterranean diet is, I think, great for a lot of things. It depends, though. I mean, if you're eating tons of pasta and not a lot of fruit and vegetables, that's not good. You know, sometimes people in Italy may not be, in Greece, may not be eating the actual Mediterranean diet. They could be eating more processed foods, and as I mentioned before, that's what happened when Greece's economy sort of did a bit of a nosedive. So question, here's a good question. How would you prescribe alteratives? For how long, how many times per day dose a patient need to take alteratives to efficiently remove the waste products in the blood? I would say a lot of the alteratives are designed to be taken more long-term. And so things like burdock could be taken for months just to help shift the body. Rumex crispus, I might use it more short-term and then switch it over to something more gentle. Generally speaking, a lot of herbs would probably be recommended to take them 2 or 3 times a day. It may be your primary treatment. Maybe you're working primarily with diet. So I don't use alteratives all the time, but if someone came with a skin condition, you might recommend a herbal tea that has some of the basic alteratives in it, work on the liver and stuff. It's usually long-term, though. Okay, so it's Ju Young again. Ayima asked me, in exams, do you want us to write the common name or scientific name? I'm using the common name for when I'm talking about them, just because otherwise I'm tripping over my words sometimes. For the exam, I will give you 5 common names or 5 Latin names and then ask you to match it up. So let's say if we have 70 questions or 65 questions on the exam, you will have to match up 5, there'll be 5 marks associated with getting the right common name with the right Latin name. So, and it might be golden seal is associated, is the scientific name for golden seal is which of the following? 1, Hydrastis canadensis, which is the correct answer. 2, Symphytum something or another, officinalis. B, Calendula hydrastis. I might make up a few like that. So there'll be a few questions like that. Michael asked me, can poppy alone in its natural state decrease pain? Absolutely. Poppy resin can be, that's how they used to get opium. So opium is the extract from poppy, and it's a very potent analgesic. Legal as well, and potent. You do not need to recognize pictures of herbs for the exam. And that was a question coming from Alicia. So that would not be something that's useful. Most naturopaths probably couldn't identify herbs in the wild if they were stranded and their life depended on it. But I include the pictures because I love plants because they have their own personalities. You can walk outdoors and find them. Even just walking around downtown Toronto, I could probably point out 25. If you give me about half an hour, we could probably walk around through different alleyways and streets. They grow everywhere. You know, you'll see burdock growing in the middle of an alley where there's graffiti on the wall beside it, or you might find someone has aconite growing in their garden. You'll see black walnut will be growing somewhere. So I show you the pictures just for I think it's just as more interesting. If all I had was slides with text, you guys would get bored. I think pictures are nice, and I like to show off my photographs as well. Okay, I think that's the last question. So I will post the lecture again, and but you guys don't care because you already saw it. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, next week we'll continue with the actions, and we'll do the infection and immune ones. I've provided you with the notes for the entire semester until the midterm. So you guys should be good, and we will see you next week. Okay? Bye for now.